very obvious hit records sometimes bore an audience after a couple of months being played on the radio. People can't stand it, which I don't think would be the case with this particular record.
John McVie's playing is just so apparently effortless and fluid and deft. So much so you don't even notice it, really, hardly.
I think what Fleetwood Mac are most known for, best known for, is not just the songs that we all have known pretty much our whole lives and have been there for us, but also all the other things that go along with it, whether it's the drugs, the decadence, the relationship breakdowns.
If you weren't around at the time, it's hard to convey just how big Fleetwood Mac were in the late 60s.
They've always been that band that my family have loved that feels really credible. They managed to sustain that credibility for years.
Fleetwood Mac's story begins amid the British blues boom of the 1960s. In July 1967, guitarist Peter Green, fresh from stints in John Mayall's Blues Breakers, where he had replaced Eric Clapton, teamed up with drummer Mick Fleetwood, another ex-Mayall band member, to form a new group.
John Mayall had given Peter Green a birthday present which amounted to a few hours studio time. And during that session, Peter recorded an instrumental which was called Fleetwood Mac, mainly because me and John were playing on it. So when he formed the band, he just chose the name Fleetwood Mac.
And they started as purely a very bluesy based band, which you can kind of see from where Peter Green started with that band that Eric Clapton was part of. Like, you see his lineage and that kind of makes sense as why it was really bluesy at the start.
Peter can stand there and be quite beatific in the way he's, playing. There's something effortless about the way Green stood there on stage. There's that sort of slight shy smile occasionally as well that he gives, when he's playing. It's like, this is all too easy to me. Maybe it was, actually.
John McVie would soon join the band permanently, making Fleetwood and McVie the only remaining original members through all the changes. Their 1968 debut album, often called Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, was steeped in electric blues and quickly earned fans in the UK. It reached number 4 on the British charts.
I saw a photograph of them in New Musical Express in 1968 when their first album came out, and it showed them standing in a back alley by some dustbins, the same bins, in fact, that appear on that first album, and they looked exactly like you would expect an underground blues group to look like in 1968. Scruffy and unkempt, but very self-assured. There's something about that photo where, they're not looning about, they're not trying to be 1967 zany. They look very assured, it's very, very purposeful and focused, which is exactly, I think, what that original band was. They knew what they were going to do when they started out.
Songs like Long Grey Mare and Blues Standards showcased Green's soulful guitar and the band's raw power. However, across the Atlantic, the band's blues sound made little impact. The debut album barely charted in the US. Later, in 1968, after their second album, Mr. Wonderful, was released, Fleetwood Mac's lineup grew when Peter Green invited an 18-year-old guitarist, Danny Kirwan, to join.
By the end of that month, Mick Fleetwood has found Lindsey Buckingham at the studio in the Valley. Is it Sunset Sound? It shouldn't be Sunset Sound. It's not Sunset Sound, that's not in the Valley.
The interesting thing about the band, I think, early on is that they did have 3 guitarists. Initially 2 guitarists, Peter Green and Jeremy Spencer. And Jeremy, although he was adequate and he could do a decent line in Elmore James riffs, I don't think he was much more than a perfunctory sort of player. And he had his little rock and roll tendencies as well. He likes to sort of muck about and do rock and roll medleys and things. But I think in order to give the band a bit more gravitas, Pete brought in Danny Kirwan, and Danny Kirwan added a whole other layer of sensitivity to the unit. I mean, now you've got 3 guitarists in the band, although funnily enough, they very rarely all play together on the records. There's usually just 2 of them. But the interplay between Peter and Danny, I think, after a while, is what makes that band.
And brought fresh ideas and melodies that stretched the band beyond traditional blues. The instrumental single, Albatross, featuring Green and Kirwan on guitar, shot to #1 in the UK, becoming one of rock history's few chart-topping instrumentals.
There was something very homegrown and very homespun about Fleetwood Mac in those early days. And as I say, it all boils down to, my mate Colin coming into class one Tuesday morning and saying, Albatross is coming to the charts at number 28, and me going, nah, records like Albatross don't come in at number 28. You've got this idea that the underground's here and the mainstream's there, and this is our little world of underground music, and John Peel plays it on a Sunday afternoon, and nobody else much on Radio 1 touches it, But they broke through all of that. They broke through all of those barriers without compromising their integrity.
So there was a small difference with how the tune performed in the UK and the US. So in the UK it went to #1, so huge, whereas in the US it only went to #4. But #4 is still pretty good. Like it's still a massive tune for them. And again, for an instrumental tune to do that is incredible. So it was starting to kind of cement them as a massive band with fans in the UK and abroad as well. And also it was a moment from the band going from bluesy to something a little bit different. So yeah, I think it was a big moment for them. It was their first #1, and it kind of stated them to be an absolutely huge band with a lot more to come.
Man of the World, the follow-up to Albatross, is an extraordinary song in many ways. It's as far away from the kind of macho blues archetype as you can get. It's a very vulnerable song. Green's very sensitive on that song, and it's very primal. I mean, he sings at one point, I wish I'd never been born. And you don't find blues singers at that time, or underground blues rock bands, sing with a kind of certain swagger. Those bands are full of well-bred home counties boys all singing about, being your backdoor man, and they're taking all their kind of, ideas about how to go about that from Muddy Waters records. And here's Peter Green comes along and sings, I'm not a good man, but I would be if I could. I mean, that seems to be an extraordinarily vulnerable thing to be singing on a hit single at that time. Green later said, he said in a very self-effacing way, I was just singing the Jewish blues. But in many ways, I think that's right. That's what he was doing. This Bethnal Green Jewish boy, singing the blues.
Around the same time, the band made a major label switch, leaving their old blues label, Blue Horizon, in early 1969. They briefly signed with Immediate Records and released the moody hit, Man of the World. But Immediate was struggling, and by mid-1969, Fleetwood Mac jumped to Warner Brothers Reprise, a label they would remain with for decades. In late 1969 and early 1970, Peter Green's life and music took a dark turn. He began using LSD heavily and spiraled into unstable spiritual beliefs.
The idea of LSD being something that's going to be dangerous is not something that I think people thought of. It was thought of a way to free your mind, to be more artistic, as a way to really create the most amazing boundary-pushing art. It's really a cautionary tale to other people. And I think as an artist, you really are, I wouldn't say you're encouraged necessarily, but part of the mythology of being an artist is to not just push yourself to the edges of what your creativity can be, but also to indulge in whatever's going to help you attain that. So regardless of the danger. So you have that attitude, the fact that they don't, I don't think LSD was seen as being as dangerous as it was, and the whole counterculture movement coming together, this perfect kind of crystallizes this situation for someone like Peter Green, unfortunately, to be a casualty.
You don't automatically peg Fleetwood Mac as being a psychedelic group. That was something else altogether, that was Pink Floyd and the crazy world of Arthur Brown and the Pretty Things and all the stuff that was going on down at UFO Club. There's nothing particularly psychedelic on the records. They don't use phasing effects, they don't really use fuzz guitars, there's no stereo panning, they don't all stand on their album covers bedecked in caftans like a lot of people did, Even the Hollies did that for a while, Fleetwood Mac didn't.
By spring 1970, Green was increasingly erratic, even insisting the band give away its money, and his grip on reality slipped.
By 1970, when he is starting to wear the big white kind of wraparound and everything, and the beard is growing, it's starting to get strange. There is a story of someone bumping into Peter, I think, and he got a piece of toast in his beard, and he bumps into him a couple of days later and the piece of toast is still there. That doesn't bode well. There's similar stories about any acid casualty at that time where you start to think, no, this is not really going in a healthy direction, is it?
He had gone through a lot of different, as they say, changes in the old cranium. Emotionally, he wasn't up to and didn't want to continue being involved with any sort of commitment at all, whether it be music or people. And he just withdrew, quite literally. He stayed at home for the better part of 3 years and hardly ever went out, actually.
To fill the leadership void, the band turned to Christine Perfect, a talented keyboardist and singer who had just left the group Chicken Shack.
When you actually talk to the critics about what she brought to the band, she was fundamentally behind some of their biggest hits that they go on to create. Like, if you look into in their greatest hits albums, her tunes are there throughout, and it's her sound that it does go on to be super iconic, and for a while is the Fleetwood Mac sound. So yeah, she was fundamental in it.
I think Christine McVie in a lot of ways is the unsung hero of Fleetwood Mac, because she's not as flamboyant as, let's say, Mick Fleetwood. She's not Lindsay and Stevie. And when she joins the band, she definitely brings, not just her own voice, which is, I think, very unique in terms of the writing and in terms of vocalization. But let's just face it, a feminine touch to the whole thing. And I think without her being that glue, they would not have continued to the point where they could have gotten Lindsay and Stevie involved in it. And also, would Stevie have been able to survive later on if she'd not had a friend, really, that she could, if it had been an all-boys club? It's very hard being on the road of all men.
In retrospect, you look back, you couldn't see that at the time, but when you look back from Rumours to that, you think, oh yeah, there it is. It's that later thing is developing there already with her. She just needs these others to be around her.
The songs that are more low-key, they're not so straight-ahead pop in a lot of ways, are Christine McVie songs, and I love them. They're just as beautiful. And because she didn't create that whole witchy woman figure like Stevie did, I think she's sometimes kind of forgotten a little bit.
Christine had already played on their latest album, Kiln House, an LP that featured Kerwin's melodic rock songs alongside Spencer's rockabilly tune. And now she became an official member. With Christine on keyboards and vocals, the band's sound grew more melodic and pop-oriented. In fact, Kerwin's and Christine's songs on Kiln House pushed Fleetwood Mac towards 1970s rock styles.
You know, one of the things that Lindsey Buckingham said is that there's like a curse basically on the guitarists in Fleetwood Mac.
It's the frontmen who have ended up being the casualties, you know, throughout. I mean, Peter goes off on his trip in more ways than one. He wants to give away all his money. He doesn't want to be part of a blues boogie outfit. Jeremy, on tour in America one day, goes out supposedly for a newspaper and doesn't come back.
The band's in Los Angeles, they're doing a gig, it's 1971. He'd been doing a lot of LSD as well, and the band's waiting for him, waiting for him, waiting for him to come back. Never comes back. Finally, after quite a long period of time, they find out that he had been inducted into the Children of God cult, which has sex with their converts. And, you know, it just is another example of a drug casualty that I think we don't really talk about that much.
And at the time, that was seen as quite shocking, and it was presented as such in the pop mags. You know, this guy just walked out of the band and nobody knows where he is. And he's with this strange cult, the Children of God, that nobody had really heard of until Jeremy Spencer joined them, even though cults were prevalent in California at the time. And in fact, you probably couldn't walk down certain streets, particularly Haight-Ashbury, without bumping into someone trying to sort of, you know, sell you a cult, you know. And so I think at the time it was actually seen a bit sort of like he's another one who's gone tonto.
Fleetwood Mac held auditions in the summer of 1971. They hired American guitarist Bob Welch, who'd been playing in Paris without even having him perform live. They liked the sound of his demos. Welch's arrival transformed the band's profile in America. Fleetwood Mac's 1972 album, Bare Trees, with many Kerwin and Welch songs, was a success, and they began touring the US regularly. Behind the scenes, however, the band was unstable.
Danny Kerwin was a big drinker, and that was, I think, part of his demise. The night he's basically fired from the group, he's completely drunk. He smashes his Les Paul to pieces in the dressing room. I think he then smashed his own head against the doors or walls or whatever, and was clearly in a bad, but he's in a bad state. No one understands that really. No one's going to give you the benefit of the doubt at that age. It's on to the next gig, you know, which is a pity.
Psychologically, he wasn't cut out for it. There's quite obviously this jinx on guitarist in the early Fleetwood Mac, quite obviously, when their three main men all end up sort of falling by the wayside for different reasons. And with Danny, by all accounts, I mean, he started drinking very heavily. He started drinking heavily before going on stage, which is never a good combination. And there's stories of him, you know, smashing up his stuff backstage. And I think in the end, Mick and John had to be pragmatic. They had no choice but to actually boot him out of the band. It sounds a terrible thing from afar, from a distance, to say, well, how could they do that to him, you know? And there's no safety net in rock and roll bands. You fall down, you fall out, you're gone, you know? There's no social services you can go to get rehabilitated. And I think it hit Danny Kerwin hard. He never really recovered.
Over the next 2 years, guitarists Bob Weston and later others came and went, making the early 1970s a tumultuous era for the band. By 1974, Fleetwood Mac had relocated from England to Los Angeles, determined to break through in America. That year, they released Heroes Are Hard to Find, Bob Welch's last album with the band. It climbed to number 34 on the Billboard 200, the group's highest US chart position so far, but Welch left by year's end to form his own group. Now the band was left without a singer or charismatic frontman.
Stevie was one very much involved with Lindsey as a person and as a creative duo. So really one came with the other. But initially it was, I think, to be honest, an intent of getting another guitar player.
If you wake up and don't smile, if you
Buckingham and Nicks first meet each other in 1966 when Stevie sees Lindsay playing up in San Francisco. And she starts collaborating him with various projects, a band called Fritz, which he brings her in to actually be a lead singer. Fritz breaks up and they move down to Los Angeles to try to garner a career as a duo. And, you know, I just absolutely love it because Stevie Nicks is waiting tables to try to support them. And they eventually do get a recording deal on Polydor in 1973. And the record is called Buckingham Nicks, very original. And it has the song Frozen Love on it. That's the title, the first single. And unfortunately, the single really doesn't go anywhere. The record really doesn't go anywhere. Stevie is still waiting tables. And Lindsay happens to be in a recording studio in Sound City. And it's the same recording studio that Mick Fleetwood is also in. And Mick Fleetwood hears Frozen Love and really likes it. Now, mind you, we've already gone through 6 guitarists at this point. And so Mick Fleetwood needs another guitarist if he wants to keep the dream alive of Fleetwood Mac continuing on. So he hears it, likes it, meets Lindsay. And Lindsay basically, he kind of has the power in the situation, is how historically it's been told. And so if Mick Fleetwood wants Lindsay Buckingham, it comes at a price, and that price is bringing Stevie Nicks into the mix.
On New Year's Eve 1974, the two Americans became the band's newest members.
She's a bit more trippy and, you know, a bit more, people say, hanging with the fairies, but she's not really. She knows exactly what she's doing. You know, she's an archetype of those. There were a certain sort of women in the 70s. Their handbags would always have a packet of tarot cards, maybe a bit couple of bones, you know, perhaps some cigarette papers. She's like one of those chicks. There were lots of those basically, but she's a very particular version of it because she's very pretty. She's a great artist. On stage, she really becomes a focal point for what Fleetwood Mac become.
She's quite a diminutive figure. She's quite short, Stevie Nicks is. And so she wanted, when she first started being on stage and being really in the, you know, fronting the band the way she does, she wanted to have a visual impact for someone that was sitting further away. And that's where the styling started to come from. And if you look at that, it's, again, if we're looking at the idea of the counterculture being put into the mainstream culture, you have a lot of those kind of hippie elements with the shawls and like when she holds, I think like a veil, I think she, a lot of times, and just her whole kind of black magic look definitely has those hippie elements to it and influences. So again, it's bringing that into the mainstream culture in a way that I don't think any other figure did before her.
In 1975, Fleetwood Mac reached superstardom. The new lineup recorded a self-titled album, Fleetwood Mac, that mixed soft rock, pop, and folk influences. Singles like Over My Head, Say You Love Me, and Stevie Nicks' mystical Rhiannon became adult contemporary hits.
The self-titled record, I think, is such an important record because it shows the possibility of what this band can do. And again, we're so deep into putting out records with the original Fleetwood Mac that, you know, again, the rhythm section holding it all together. We're so deep into Fleetwood Mac as a band, even though it has rotating members. The fact they can come out in this new formation and have a #1 song with Rhiannon, which is still, I think, one of the best songs ever written, period. Beautiful, cascading vocals, catchy, everything about it. It shows the possibility for them making another commercial record. And that record is so important for that.
Rhiannon rings like a bell through the night. Would you love her? She rules her life like a bird in flight. Will it be her lover?
Has the group expressed changes in your music through the years?
Well, basically, it depends on people that obviously that listen to the band. The change really that has come in recently came in on Chris McVie, John McVie, and myself, which basically has been the basis of the band for about 5 years at any rate. And then prior to that, myself and John were the rhythm section. John plays bass, I play the drums. And the changes are purely writers that come into the band, like Stevie and Lindsay both write, and members that have since passed on, as it were. out of the band were writers, and there was definitely a strain of Fleetwood Mac through the whole thing, although there's been a lot of different styles of music. But it really depends on the listener rather than the people in the band to relate to how they feel about the changes.
How do you feel that your addition to the band has changed what they were doing, and how has it changed what you were doing?
Oh, it changed what I was doing a lot. Well, just as a writer, you know, sure, I'm going to touch them with my songs, you know.
Is it a collaborative effort when you put a song together? How much input does a writer have with the way it's going to sound on the
For
record?
me, it's very collaborative because I play guitar and I play piano, but I'm not a virtuoso at either. So I just sort of write a song very, very simply, and then I just sort of have to say here, because I can't go out and put all the great sounding parts on it because I just don't have the knowledge to do it. So I have to pretty much, you know, give it to them and say, do with it what you may, you know. And then I'm always there going, well, I'm not sure I like that way of doing it, but at the same time, on this particular album that's just gone by, everything they did on all my songs was, I couldn't have done them. If I had the knowledge to do them, I wouldn't have done them better, I don't think.
How about the hit single? All of a sudden there's a hit single that takes off.
Yeah.
When you're putting it together, can you sense something about it that makes it different?
No, in actual fact, that was, as a track on the album, was not considered. Obviously, when you made an album, you say, well, that, and that would probably be in order of preference to be the obvious single. And that one wasn't the one until it just crept up, where it started being played a hell of a lot. And then it occurred to us that, in actual fact, because of that, we should make it the single, which we did.
In other words, you in this instance at least, waited for public taste to
Absolutely.
say what it was?
It was purely down to that. It was creeping up behind everything else and was always there, and because no one had thought of it, it was a more healthy thing to do, to release that. And I think it's a sort of record that's not going to instantly be there, but it's creeping in and it's doing really well, which is always the best way to get a hit record, something that stays there for a long time and doesn't... very obvious hit records sometimes bore an audience after a couple of months being played on the radio. People can't stand it, you know, which I don't think would be the case with this particular record.
Do you think it signals a new direction musically, or is it just a continuation?
No, I think it's just really fortunate. You know, we're really happy about it. There's no... The only difference would be, sure, you now know that you've got a hit record, and that's it, and you hope you have a load more. It definitely gives people the chance, at any rate, which is always the way of, oh, well, they're not going to have another hit, or this one isn't as good as that. But that always happens, whatever you do. You know, even if you're playing in the local village hop, you know, and you play down the road in a big ball, and people say, oh, well, not as good as they used to be. It just gives people and critics more apparent things to like or not to like, you know, which is part of what we do, and you accept that.
How about touring? How do you feel about touring? You've been on a long tour.
A very, very long tour. In fact, the longest
really,
I've ever
May
done.
10th. We had a month off in Hawaii, but we have not really had any time off. A couple days in L.A. here and there, you know.
How does
Not
that
really.
Work with the band?
Mm?
How does that affect
Eh?
everything?
Well, I mean, for obvious things, I mean, people get tired, and you tend not to have or allow yourself the time to do things that you'd like to do, because you literally have to pace yourself through the day. You're traveling, and like today, last few nights, for whatever reasons, a few of us haven't had the right amount of sleep, so you really seriously have to say, well, you don't talk too much, you don't let yourself think too much until the last couple of hours in the evening, where you pull yourself together, which is something you get used to.
By 1976, the band was under enormous pressure.
They've quickly recorded the Fleetwood Mac album, and then they go out and work it for 6 months at least on the American road, and it gradually gets bigger and bigger and bigger, this record, you know, and singles come off it, and you know, by the end of 1976 the record sold 4 million copies, and their lives have been utterly transformed. The dramas that were happening, the soap opera of their lives, was it before they get the success. Stevie Nicks said, that she's kind of surprised. They go on the road and Christine McVie is in the back of the van sleeping on the amps. It's kind of still pretty rootsy. It's not very much different to what Christine McVie would have been doing with Chicken Shack going up and down the motorways in England, They're kind of at that stage. But that's when their relationships are falling to bits.
First we have Lindsay and Stevie. They're breaking up after a very long relationship. We have Stevie eventually starts secretly dating Mick Fleetwood. We have Christine McVie and John McVie breaking up, and Christine McVie starts dating the lighting guy, and she writes "You Make Loving Fun" about that relationship. Lindsey Buckingham brings the lyrics for "Go Your Own Way" to a practice, and Stevie's reading the lyrics going, oh my God, this is about me. And she has to go up on stage every night and perform that. I mean, again, getting goosebumps talking about it. I can't even imagine what that must be like. And then her kind of rebuttal, if you would, is Dreams, which is quite very lush in where the lyrics are, but the production as well. Almost those two songs almost show that fiery nature of Lindsay and the more kind of contemplative Stevie Nicks, and the sadness and how sadness is really displayed in both those songs, how that comes about. I mean, can you imagine though? I mean, on the same notion, can you imagine being John McVie, seeing them perform "You Make Loving Fun" about someone else that your, estranged ex-wife is having sex with? Like, how horrible! But they go out and they do it, and that is kind of like everybody's worst nightmare, like having to not just see your ex, but perform with them, live with them on the road, be with them 24/7, and be of an interest to like not just the media in the United States, but worldwide, because Fleetwood Mac by this point is a phenomena.
The new wealth and non-stop touring fueled heavy alcohol and drug use. Tensions ran high as everyone was expected to deliver another hit album. The group channeled this turmoil into Rumours, released February 1977.
In terms of the themes, I think were about the relationships that were happening in the band itself.
I mean, obviously that becomes the subject matter of Rumours, but I think, it was just one of those points in time when, they meet as all their relationships are collapsing.
Rumours is all about them breaking up and the different, like Christine McVie being with the lighting man and all of that kind of emotional turmoil, and that's become the mythology around it. So it's hard to know like how much of that is real and how much we've kind of created. It seems quite real, and what makes it seem real is how powerful those songs are.
This album laid bare their heartbreak. Buckingham's angry "Go Your Own Way," Nicks's yearning "Dreams," and Christine McVie's reassuring "Don't Stop." Rumours became a cultural phenomenon. It won the 1978 Grammy for Album of the Year and became one of the world's all-time bestsellers, with over 19 million sold in the US and 40 million worldwide. It also spent many years on the UK charts, eventually surpassing 1,000 weeks in the top 100.
I'm projecting, probably thinking this, but can you imagine being in that situation in terms of who's saying what to who, and when you're in a band, you're in the studio, you're in an incubator basically. So there's all these different breakups and ruptures and uniting of other people, and who's telling who what, you know what I mean? Like the name itself kind of says it all, I think. And the fact that they were able to still continue on as a band, but also put that into songs. I think that's what again makes it such an important record, because most bands would just split up. Most bands would just be like, you're an evil, horrible person, I hate you. But no, they continue on and then go on to tour it around the world, which is just, it's no surprise that the excesses they go to, because that was a way of self-medicating.
Jim Reddy, California.
I'm fine, how are you?
Excellent. I met you 3 years ago when you first played Dallas. thought you would make the Fairmont Hotel.
Was I wearing my glasses?
No, you're wearing a nice hat though.
Oh.
Can you tell us a little about why you chose to tour again while you're rehearsing for the new album?
Because we love to play. Mostly. We just got itchy. Everybody just wanted to go. So I said, let's go.
You're tired of rehearsing?
It's not the same. You know, it's not the same to not play for people. You need to do it. I mean, periodically, you need to go out and play. It's real important. Otherwise, you forget that there's an audience out there. You just become a recording band.
The Rolling Stones recently did an innovative concert tour where they played some stadiums, some medium-sized halls, some really small halls. Do you anticipate Fleetwood Mac might ever go back to playing small halls just for the experience of it?
Sure. Fleetwood Mac likes to play anywhere. I mean, it doesn't really matter where we play.
How's the group getting along these days?
Fine. It seems to be the rock in my life.
Seems to be what?
The rock in my life.
You're not caught between a rock and hard place anymore, right?
No. It's just strong. It just stands very strong.
A couple of years ago, it seemed like when you first joined the group, there was a lot of gossip. And now we don't hear too much about the gossip. People are talking about the music. You find that a relief? What is your reaction to the change?
Well, I think that people realize now that if we could come through that, we could come through anything. I mean, we realize that we could come through anything, you know. And sadly seemed to have hurt us, so the band's strong.
Fleetwood Mac's contribution to music was cemented when they were honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1979. Emboldened by success, Fleetwood Mac took risks. Their next album, Tusk, was a double LP produced at great expense. It cost about $1.4 million to make, making it the most expensive rock album ever at that time.
Fleetwood Mac's one of the first bands on that level of visibility to have that kind of decadence, the rock star decadence. You know, there are other people before them, but it's just so over the top. And I think that them getting a star kind of, again, puts a stamp down of this is appropriate behavior if you are a multi-million selling rock star, literally with a star. And I think that that's something that is maybe a subconscious thing that people, even now, I mean, there's definitely an idea. Like, you don't say party like a mime, you say party like a rock star. And I think it links directly back to what we're talking about right now. And how something physical that you can look at in Los Angeles, that makes it that much more of a palatable connection.
When we were on the road, we used to do sound checks up on stage, you know, before the audience would come in. And it was basically a jam thing we did on every concert during that tour. Lindsay started doing this riff, da 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 da. So that's how the actual song was started. The idea was, which everyone thought really was pretty off the wall, was to record it in Dodger Stadium. I don't know why I thought of doing that, but while I was in France, up in Normandy, there was a marching band that came out at weekends and would march around the town. And the idea then I'd had was to use a marching band on a future track so that you could actually do that live, although we only did it live in Los Angeles. I was hoping to be able to play one song and have the local marching band out of every town all over the world come out, because it would be a really good, warm feeling for the town, and it would be a good rapport for the audience to know their local band was playing. That, in actual fact, didn't happen, but that was my plan.
Tusk was an experimental work. The title track featured the USC Marching Band, and songs like Stevie Nicks' Sarah and Buckingham's avant-garde arrangements pushed creative boundaries. The album debuted at number 4 in the US and number 1 in the UK. But at 2 times platinum in the US, it sold far less than Rumours and even fewer than Fleetwood Mac. Its unconventional sound divided fans and critics. By 1982, the band paired back. They took a year off, during which each member worked on solo projects. When they reconvened, they aimed for a more straightforward sound. The result was Mirage, an album of polished pop rock. Mirage became Fleetwood Mac's 3rd US number 1 album and was certified double platinum with 2 million US sales. Hit singles included Christine McVie's Hold Me and Gypsy, as well as Oh Diane.
After Mirage, you have Stevie Nicks has said that she thinks she did $1 million worth of cocaine over the time period that she was addicted to it, which I think she eventually kicks in 1986.
But that also got her into a different set of problems because the drugs that were prescribed to her, she then became addicted to, which is far worse than cocaine.
A major world tour followed. But after years of excess, problems resurfaced behind the scenes. Mick Fleetwood went bankrupt, Stevie Nicks entered rehab, and John McVie suffered a seizure, all symptoms of the toll that fame and addiction had taken. People began to wonder if Fleetwood Mac could hold together. In 1987, the Rumours lineup gave it one more go. They recorded Tango in the Night, which became the band's best-selling album since Rumours. It reached number 1 in the UK and sold about 3 million in the US.
They were already so many records in, and if you look at kind of where music was at that second, the fact that they even had as much success as they did with that record, again, I think it shows how great the songwriting is on that, because there really wasn't many classic rock bands. You know, you look at MTV at the time, videos from Tango in the Night were being played. Who else from like their contemporaries from the 70s were being played on MTV? How many of their contemporaries had teenagers singing their songs, buying their records? I mean, what an achievement that is to be able to cross over with that record into that youth marketplace, which they were able to do.
Stevie would probably have been at her worst, the Tango in the Night period, I think, because she's got several sets of pressures on her, not just being one of the singers with Fleetwood Mac. She's really a big solo star by then. So I think that would have kind of been, that would have really, it should have imploded on that, really.
I was not surprised when Lindsey Buckingham left after Tango in the Night. I did not think it was surprising. I thought it was more surprising that they had gone on to make that record in the first place. So hard, like, it must be so hard to make those records and sit and create something with each other.
In 1990, they released Behind the Mask with new guitarists Rick Vito and Billy Burnett. The album had a more straightforward rock feel. It went gold in the US and even hit number 1 in the UK for a brief time. Fleetwood Mac toured behind it in 1990, performing sold-out stadium shows.
To me, Rumours is like the quintessential record where everything else that comes after it, regardless of what genre, is built from the Rumours record. Again, and to have Lindsey not there is to take away that tension between him and Stevie that you want to see when you go see them perform and you want to hear when you listen to their songs. And they come as a package with all that history behind them that you know as a fan when you are engaging with their music. And so for him not to be there, I think it kind of shatters what you as a Fleetwood Mac fan want to experience.
I nearly call you Fleetwood Mac. Mick Fleetwood. Isn't there a problem there that everybody is buying the old tunes, but there is a whole cutting edge there, there's house. Aren't you almost stifling all that?
I mean,
are bands like Fleetwood Mac? No, I don't think so. I think that the whole point of this business, I think there is room, yes, there is room for everything. I just think that the way the English charts, for instance, function, and I'm not terribly conversant with it, but I get the impression from people in the record business that it's getting too fast for anyone to keep up with. Totally. And as such, I think what people are getting is they're suffering from the downside, which is going to be that. And I hope that the 180-degree turn will be that people will want to have a more nurturing situation where they feel that come 3 months from now, this band, who were they, what were they, they're gone. I think it's something to give us some sort of time to let people grow with certain bands, and I think people are desirous of that, you know, myself.
Christine McVie and Stevie Nicks announced that the Behind the Mask tour would be their last.
The Fleetwood Mac entity, I think, is something that we've all come to terms with, that we can do things outside of the band without the band disintegrating and stopping, because we've already done that. We realize that, again, a lot of people think, you know, because people go off and do different things, that there will be no more band. I think we've come to terms with that within ourselves, and people realize that the continuous momentum of Fleetwood Mac may not be as feverish as it certainly was for seven solid years. And I think it's just something that we know we can come back to as people, as musicians.
After a few years with new members, the band tried one more studio album. Time came out in 1995 with a completely revamped lineup. Fleetwood, John McVie, Vito, and new singer Becca Bramlett.
When it was announced that they were getting back together, it wasn't just Fleetwood Mac fans, but I think because they become by that point so important in so many people's lives, it may not have just been people that had the records. The people that by this time the songs were played often on the radio, they were incorporated into commercials. So it was a much bigger ripple than just the hardcore fans that were excited about this idea of them being back together.
Following Time's commercial flop, Fleetwood Mac effectively went on hiatus. The story didn't end. In 1997, in a nod to the enduring popularity of the classic lineup, the band, Fleetwood, both McVie's, Buckingham, Nicks, reunited for an MTV Unplugged special. This led to a live album and video called The Dance. Shortly after this triumphant return, Christine McVie left the road again to enjoy retirement. Fleetwood Mac was also honoured with induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1998 and awarded Britain's Outstanding Contribution honour. In 2003, the remaining members released one more studio album, Say You Will. This was Fleetwood Mac's 17th album and their first studio work in over 30 years without Christine McVie as a full band member. She only guested on a few tracks. Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks took over keyboard duties. Say You Will reached number 3 in the US and eventually went gold, but it did not produce any major enduring hits. It was the last album Buckingham appeared on before his 2018 exit.
There's something about the idea of Fleetwood Mac that I've just always liked, you know, from the moment I saw them. And it just heartens me that they've kept going. And, you know, as I said, I saw that O2 show, you know, where Christine came back on the encores. I thought the shows were fantastic. I mean, I was surprised almost. I thought they were still great. But they really were, you know.
After a few quiet years, an exciting development happened. In 2014, Christine McVie agreed to rejoin Fleetwood Mac as a full member. The reunited band, Fleetwood, both McVie's, Buckingham and Nicks, toured the world once more on the On With The Show tour, delighting fans with a near-perfect incarnation of the Rumours lineup. They continued to perform together until 2018, when Lindsey Buckingham was unexpectedly fired from the band. Fleetwood Mac replaced him on guitar and vocals with Mike Campbell, formerly of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and Neil Finn from Crowded House.
But isn't part of the point the young people, I mean, they want the music to be immediate, very, very sort of house and rave, and that they actually, it only sells because mum and dad think it's a load of rubbish.
No, I think there is. I think there is an element of that, yes, and there always will be. I think the Rolling Stones benefited from that sort of. I know my mother actually thought the Beatles were great, but the Rolling Stones were too outrageous, so it meant that I went out and bought Rolling Stones records. But I think that that's going to happen in any generation. But I think the major point is, yes, there is room for Fleetwood Mac. Yes, there is room for Kylie Minogue. Yes, there is room for hip-hop and dance. Our problem is, and one of our major problems is radio. Radio is getting bogged down in the where are we aiming at? I mean, I'm sure that Mick will tell you in America, they have a real problem. They are so narrow-banded. You see, one thing I loved about English radio is you could listen to George Formby, Frank Sinatra, the Beatles, Gracie Fields and Fleetwood Mac, all on the same show.
Peter Green was the co-founder of Fleetwood Mac, but he left in 1970, and he's had these documented issues with mental health and with drugs. He was later diagnosed with schizophrenia. And you've said in the past, you know, we didn't know what was going on. It was too late for us to help. Do you think, Mick, in the current climate where we're much more open in talking about mental health, seeking support, there is a stigma, but certainly not the stigma of many years ago, things might have turned out a little bit differently for Peter?
If I had a magic wand, I would have wished that all of us, me included, of course, would have known how much trouble Peter was in. We just weren't equipped to even know, and it was really not even tangible apart from way towards the end after he had experimented with hallucinogenics and stuff, and it was all. Peter was one of those people who should not have gone near anything like that. He was already, you can tell by the music that he wrote, incredibly sensitive, incredibly in tune, overly in tune. The last thing he needed was, you know, a mental kick like that from substance. We weren't to know that. It wouldn't have been him staying in the band, but it would have been, there could have been some signs that we would have been equipped to know about, would have helped him. And I think it's very fair to say that certainly would have been my wish, if I could turn the clock back and have that ability to be aware.
Despite all the many changes over 5 decades, 16 studio albums, Grammy wins, Hall of Fame induction, and countless sold-out tours, Fleetwood Mac's legacy is secure.
I think what Fleetwood Mac are most known for, best known for, is not just the songs that we all have known pretty much our whole lives and have been there for us, but also all the other things that go along with it, whether it's the drugs, the decadence, the relationship breakdowns. All those things add layers of authenticity that anyone can relate to, whether you are a rock star or you are a rock climber or you're doing anything. Like, it just, those are ideas that everybody deals with, and I think that is what they're most well known for. Not just writing the songs, but actually meaning what they're writing, and that's an important thing about the band.
Their rhythm section, Fleetwood and McVie, anchored the band through every era, and their music from British blues to world-famous rock pop has influenced generations. Rumours alone earned them a reputation as one of the all-time great bands. Whether with Peter Green, Bob Welch, or the Buckingham and Nicks era, Fleetwood Mac repeatedly reinvented themselves and triumphed. After Christine McVie's death in 2022, Stevie Nicks vowed the band would not continue without her, bringing this long saga to a close. Fleetwood Mac's story is one of musical brilliance born from turbulence, a testament to survival, reinvention, and the enduring power of song.